Hello, everyone. My name is John Mohammed. I'm the president of A&A Trading, a family company that's been on the coast in the forest industry for over 40 years. We have several First Nation partnerships in the timber management and marketing business. Our focus with those partnerships is economic prosperity, sustainability, and growth in the Indigenous communities. Today, I'm very pleased to be here and acknowledge the unceded traditional territory of the Upper Nicola First Nation. Behind me is a beautiful Glimpse Lake, and I'm very proud to be sponsoring and presenting the panel today on contracting and business opportunities. This conference is always a great opportunity to exchange ideas, share information, and grow business in the resource sector. So without further ado, I'd be happy and honored to introduce your moderator for the panel today on contracting and business opportunities, Dallas Smith, President of the Nanwakolas Council. Take it away, Dallas.
Thanks so much, my dear friend John Mohammed from A&A Trading. Panel 2, Establishing Contracting and Business Opportunities. You know, I really appreciate the always unwavering support that A&A has. Whenever I call them, they just say, what do you need and when do you need it by? And maybe that's because we have a very strong partnership between my nation, or maybe they just are a company that understands to work with First Nations communities, you have to engage the community, and John's always there to answer the bell. Last year, he actually shot the promotional video. This year, he starred in it. So good on you, John. Really appreciate it. I'm now pleased to welcome you to Panel 2, Establishing Contracting and Business Opportunities. It's my pleasure to introduce this morning's speakers. We have Teara Fraser, the lead executive officer and founder of Iskwew, you'll have to teach me how to do that one properly, AIR. We have my friend JP Gladu, acting executive director of Indigenous Resource Network. My friend Seanna McConnell, director of Indigenous Relationships from Western Forest Products, and who's someone who's growing into be that older brother I don't have, both from a business sense, an 80s movies sense, and just someone who's fun to hang out with. Troy Young, who's the general manager of Roga Group, one of our partners at Nanwakolas Council. So really pleasure to have you all here. I just can't say enough gratitude for you sharing your time and thoughts and the candid discussions we're about to have. When we started the Indigenous Resource Opportunities Conference, at first it was about how to bring First Nations together. And then it grew into success stories. And it was always hard trying to find 2 full days of panelists around First Nation success stories, because 10, 12 years ago when we first had the first one, they just simply weren't there. Now we have to almost get a waiting list because there's so many tremendous opportunities happening out there, not only in coastal BC, British Columbia, but as we're starting to learn throughout the rest of Canada, we're starting to see Indigenous communities take control of their destiny and take their place, their rightful place in both the decision-making world, but also, and I don't mean this from a purely capitalistic point of view, but from the revenue generation point of view that comes from this. There's the service side of it and all that, but it's really nice to have you folks here to talk about the actual building of joint businesses and relationships that are necessary to just help First Nations keep striving towards that self-certainty and determination that we all need to be a part of. So without further ado, to steal a word from my friend John Mohammed, we'll get into it. Each of the panelists is going to give a few minutes opening statement, and then we'll get some question and answer, some dialogue going. Those of you who are on the Whova app, please start to send in your questions, and I really look forward to speaking with each of you. So we drew straws, and we decided that since JP is probably the fastest one without mechanization, like Teara the pilot, JP is going to hit lead off for us. So JP, welcome to IROC, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Dallas. It's great to see you and to see my fellow panelists. When you had Sophie, Pierre, Auntie Sophie on, I just flooded with memories. I might have been the youngest Aboriginal forestry advisor when I first moved to Cranbrook, BC, my first foray into BC, I was 23 years old. And back when the Kinbasket was part of the Tunaha Kinbasket Tribal Council, I got to spend time with Chief Pierre and her community, and to revisit the community back a few years ago, sort of looking at the St. Eugene's mission. And anyways, she's just an incredible woman. Congratulations on having her open. And if Sophie, you're still watching, I absolutely admire everything that you've done for your community and continue to do. I thought, so I'm the acting executive director of the Indigenous Resource Network. I'll talk a little bit about that, but I wanted to share a little bit of a story about just my own First Nation. My First Nation I live on, my community, Sandpoint First Nation, Northwestern Ontario, northeast of Thunder Bay. And often it's about, and I've been listening in wherever I possibly can in the conference, and it's not about resource development for the sake of doing resource development. It's not only about revenue generation. It's about finding that balance so that our communities can have a healthy economy, achieving economic parity, economic reconciliation, all of these terms that we talk about every day, but putting it in action is sometimes incredibly challenging. The way that we've been able to do it here in my community, and I worked for my First Nation for a few years, and we established a sawmill. We have the Trans-Canada pipeline that one of my grandfathers helped build goes right through my community. We have an old rail line goes through our community. We have 2 hydro projects that we're partners in. We have a lithium mine that has road access, Rocktech Lithium, right through our community. We've got some other mining projects on the go. And, again, our sawmill is thriving. And I also am anybody that knows me, I'm an avid outdoors person. And my daughter was up this past weekend, and we were out hunting birds and moose. And to be able to have that balance and to have our people working in these various resource sector opportunities is absolutely a dream for me. And I'll also to say that, through this process back in Ontario, back in the years, how many years ago, Living Legacy, our whole lake, which is the biggest lake in Ontario, surrounded by the Ontario borders, is fully protected. And I fish and I net fish in our territory, and to have all this at our doorstep, but having Indigenous, having our communities, and we have neighboring communities benefiting from Mother Earth's resources has just been incredible. And these types of opportunities are in front of our communities across the country, whether it be agriculture, mining, forestry, oil, gas, fisheries. There's so much, and it's going to take our leadership in partnership with our resource-based companies, with the balance sheets, our know-how. I think the future's getting brighter. And just to say, Dallas, you're absolutely right. You're probably going to need a week next year if you want to actually get all the Indigenous success stories to the table. And I'm looking forward to continue to be a part of that process. So thanks again, Miigwech, for having me here.
Thanks so much, JP. It's nice that you're able to bring that back to the balance that's necessary there. Just because we work to develop opportunities doesn't mean we take advantage, doesn't mean we don't use what the Creator put around us. And so it's nice to hear that story of you and your daughter out on the lands, just accessing things and spending that time. And I'm sure talking about a vast array of different issues from, maybe the CP line, or sorry, the Canada line that you talked about, or the train tracks, and just that time to be out in the actual territories with your family is something that I really look forward to. I've got 3 young girls myself, 8, 5, and 3. And so being able to get them out into our traditional territory and understand the balance that we're trying to achieve, I think just sets the next generation up to continue that line that we're going, that's bringing us that prosperity we're looking for. So appreciate your time and looking forward to getting into it. Sorry, I'm blank already. Seanna, or was it Troy? It was Seanna.
I can go either way. Yeah.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Seanna McConnell, and I'm joining you from my house in East Vancouver on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. As noted in the introduction, I'm the Director of Indigenous Relationships for Western Forest Products, and I'm pleased to join the panel today with Teara, Troy, and JP, and I look forward to an interesting dialogue on contracting and business opportunities, and I anticipate some good questions from Dallas and from the group that are watching online. Looking across the agenda for the conference, I think there's some great speakers lined up and a lot of really interesting and innovative partnerships that are being featured. I think really in British Columbia, we're at a bit of an inflection point, I would describe, with the alignment of UNDRIP on the federal and provincial side, a unique opportunity to kind of launch into true and meaningful involvement of Indigenous communities in the renewable and extractive resource sectors, and also an opportunity for direct equity participation in those sectors alongside the new kind of innovation around joint decision making. At Western, we're working really hard to find our place as a publicly traded company in the evolving reconciliation framework. Through relationships like what we've developed so far and continue to work on with our friends, the Hoyat First Nations in the TFL 44 Limited Partnership, and through active discussions with a number of other First Nations, we're looking to demonstrate how businesses can play a role in the reconciliation framework while working collaboratively to advance British Columbia's position as a world leader in sustainable forest management. The latest example of this happened really only yesterday, and it's not the tabling of new legislation in the House, but the joint announcement that Western and the Nanwakolas Council had yesterday, in that case, Nanwakolas representing 4 First Nations on Vancouver Island, announcing a letter of understanding to negotiate a joint planning and reconciliation protocol agreement. We are anticipating that agreement will be together by Christmas time and will include both an integrated resource management plan that will largely focus on the tenures on Vancouver Island and the areas that we share with the nations on the island, but also to look at potential long-term business opportunities that we can develop together. We will be working through those discussions with the nations and through Dallas and his colleagues on the council. And I've no doubt that as part of those discussions, we'll also be talking about some more near-term business and contracting opportunities. I've only worked in forestry for 5 years. I think some of my panelists here have spent a lot more time, certainly in the sector. But what I've seen and what I understand is that the labor and contracting world of forestry is particularly complex, and it can be really difficult for new contractors and even employees sometimes to break into that sector. But given what I was talking about earlier around the inflection point where we're at in British Columbia, I think there's a unique opportunity to really align with existing contractors, with the labor sector, and really try and work together to find opportunities and create space for Indigenous people in the sector, both on the business side, on the employee side, and really as owners of larger businesses. I'd be remiss to not identify the role that government can also play to support Indigenous businesses in the resource sector. In many cases, we're going to need that third set of hands in the mix to help launch these successful ventures. And I think that's government can support around capacity and business development, backstopping loans, making policy decisions that support viable businesses and the viable sector. And in some situations, really getting out of the way to allow us to move forward together with our Indigenous partners. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion and to learning a lot from the panelists and to having some good dialogue. Really excited to be here with Troy and JP, who have such a strong foundation in forestry, and also with Teara, with your really great woman-led Indigenous business that you've started on your own. So thanks, Dallas.
Yeah, thanks so much, Seanna. It was interesting when we were getting the press release ready to go for the new discussions that we're starting that have been in place for a long time. We've had a very positive working relationship with Western Forest Products and yourself and Shannon Jansen. And then to get trumped when the legislation came out, it was kind of like, oops. But, that's something that we need to talk about. We need to talk with government about initiatives that we're talking about with industry groups in our territories. And, UNDRIP has to mean something eventually, and it has to put us in that driver's seat. And I'm really excited to talk about how existing contracting opportunities and joint ventures and businesses can really start to anchor the direction we're trying to go in from a policy direction. Troy, my friend, Cowboys are 5-1. We're in good position right now, but I don't want to hear any of your thoughts on that, being that we're both Cowboys fans. So we'll take some jeers from that from the rest of the crowd. But you know, you've been working in partnerships with First Nations pretty much most of your grown-up life. I know you've been patient in building the partnership with us that's resulted in Iskwew Ventures, our new partnership between us. But you know, I'll give you your full 5 minutes. I won't cut you down based on extra time that your cousins used this time. So please have the floor.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Dallas. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss the work on the ground in our communities. We work to strengthen First Nations, Indigenous representation in natural resource sectors. I'd like to recognize that I'm currently sitting on the unceded territory of the Wet'suwet'en in Houston, BC. And I'd like to thank Dallas for the invitation to speak. And I'd like to thank the committee and staff that organize IROC in the background. I think it's encouraging that we have a forum where we can get out and talk about models of success and common challenges that we're all having to overcome as we push forward. Give you a little background on myself. Troy Young, which everyone can read, but just used to saying it. I'm general manager of the Roga group. We encapsulate a number of companies. Some are wholly owned by myself. Some are, how would you describe it? Some are a company that's set up with First Nation shareholders. Some are joint ventures. Some are revenue shares. We work throughout BC in a variety of sectors. We've got, primarily started in logging, log hauling, road building in the forestry sector. We do civil work. We've got a side that does pipeline installation, pipeline utility maintenance, and variety of work throughout. We've currently got relationships with Seashot, Kamloops, Whispering Pines. My closest relationship is with Wet'suwet'en, which is where my family's from, Nanwakolas Council, and we're developing others. So for us, it's not a new thing. And you're right when you say all my adult life. So for as long as I can remember, myself, my parents were involved with First Nations communities and helping integrate them and get them out into commercial mainstream. And I'll start back with, when the Nechako Basin exploration was taking place in the 70s, we were working with NASCO. We worked with Des Cho and McLeod Lake when they did the Mount Milligan clearing back in the 90s, 20 years before the mine even went into production. We worked with Des Cho on the power lines into the Kemess. So we've got a long history of working with First Nations, and we think it's important that from our learnings, we can teach other people that it's more about trying to find out what the actual communities are looking for as compared to, how would you put it, the old method of here's what we're offering. In our building of relationships in the contracting community, our first question is usually we ask the community what they're looking for. Do you want jobs? Do you want just revenue? Do you want, what's important and what capacity do you have and what do you want to build? And we want you to think out, 20, 30 years from now, what would you like it to look like? Because that's going to be the key to being successful. Having that vision and the fortitude to push and make sure it's going to work in the end. And from there, we found that for the most part, it's created a good relationship and we've been able to build good businesses. We've had 20 years of success with Clay Tenay, where they just recently bought the shares in one of the ventures we had together, and they're now successfully running their business, and we're proud of that. Thanks.
Tremendous, Troy. The patience that it takes to work with one First Nations community, let alone the many that Roga does, is really just shows the leadership that you and your company show. I know we danced for a long time before we finally got some paperwork between us, and the fact that you weren't pushy and saying, well, this is what I need, really just gave my chiefs the comfort level to grow the business that we're engaged in together. So really look forward to getting into a little bit more. Teara, Fraser, you have intrigued me since the first time I heard about your enterprise. I have traveled up and down the coast, and I've been lucky enough to be to remote communities where, air service and the logistics around that is a major challenge and a major obstacle, but as you've shown, is a major opportunity. So please, why don't you give us some insight on what you're doing and how it came to be?
Great. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. My name is Teara Fraser, and I'm a proud Métis woman and the lead executive officer, or the LEO, of Iskwew Air. I took the word chief out of my title a while back, so I just started calling myself an LEO. And then I thought, what is an officer anyways? So my title keeps changing as I figure out what the right thing to call myself is. But anyways, I'm the founder of Iskwew Air. And on the bottom of my business card and my email signature, it says, P.S. It's not that hard to say Iskwew, which is a Cree word for woman. I'm joining you today from Vancouver International Airport. So you may hear airplanes in the background. I love the sound of airplanes and think they're most welcome in everything that I do. The unceded territory of the Musqueam peoples. And I'm thrilled to be here. I got my start as an entrepreneur with Kisik Aerial Survey, which I've now sold. But being here today in this resource sector, and even seeing the sponsors that are coming up is bringing me back to that world. And as the owner of Kisik Aerial Survey, doing aerial survey, everyone always asks me, are you drones, and are drones going to take over what you're doing? And I said, I'm never doing drones. And now here I am a decade later, looking at what does a sustainable technology of the future look like, and how can we be a part of that? Iskwew Air, which I launched literally just before COVID. So an airline startup is a pretty challenging endeavor, and doing that in a global pandemic is next level hard. But as a traditional air transportation, we offer charters. And we just started scheduled service into Qualicum Beach on Vancouver Island a couple of months ago, and connecting that community with Vancouver. And we also see ourselves as the bridge between traditional air transportation and the sustainable technology of the future. When I first started, I got a lot of media attention, and media would always ask, what's the big grand vision? Do you see having operations all across the nation and hundreds of airplanes? And that's what media wanted to hear, and also cool what I wanted to say. But I was challenged with the footprint that we leave. And so at the same time as the traditional air transportation service, we're very much a part of ecosystem looking at the sustainable future of aviation. And I am absolutely committed to seeing Indigenous peoples leading in that space. I'm an entrepreneur, and so I believe that co-creating the conditions for Indigenous business to thrive is the single most natural, swift, and effective pathway to economic reconciliation in our country. And so I'm super excited to be on a panel where we're talking about business opportunities and for Indigenous peoples. And I'm excited to tell you more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So exciting, such a great panel. The perspectives that we can get into. I think again of my daughter's. My daughter's going to be an astronaut for Halloween, and she knows that she has to be a pilot before she can be an astronaut. So just again, the inspiration that's going to be drawn from this from so many different levels is incredible. So thank you all so much for being here. So those of you following at home, please go on to the tab and bring your questions forward. But until then, I'll start. JP, what have you seen over the last couple years that makes you feel good around partnerships? You talked to the fact that you carried on from my point where it was really hard to find success stories. We could find stories of people trying and really working at building equity partnerships and some of those things. But what have you seen in the last couple of years that just makes you feel better and knows we're on the right track?
Thanks for that question, Dallas. I think Canada's finally woken up that they can do it the hard way, which is got a lower chance of success or viability, or they can do it the progressive way, and that's actually working with our communities in the natural resource sectors. They're finally beginning to understand that they can dig their heels in and fight, or they can lean in with us and find pathways where we all benefit. I mean, originally, the original relationship was based on respect and reciprocity, where we all benefit. So they're finally starting to figure that out, and they're leading government. Quite frankly, I think government's got a ways to get caught up. But I will pause for 1 second on that and say it was one of the proudest moments of my career so far was when I was so fortunate to lead the CCAB and our team, and we got the government to make a commitment to 5% target of Indigenous procurement, those contracting opportunities, and driving that down the supply chain, which is part of the success that we're seeing. And great to see my successor, Tabitha Bull, pull that over the finish line and having actually legislated. So that's one of the elements that I'm seeing great success in, is that we're becoming more integrated within the supply chain right across the sectors. Secondly, we're starting to see a lot more of the tenure systems being allocated to Indigenous communities. I mean, BC is a prime example of the forest sector and the allocations that are being directed towards the Indigenous communities for management. I mean, even my own First Nation, we between us and our 3 other First Nation partners, we own and manage 100% of the Lake Nipigon forest management, which is amazing. Other things that starting to really excite me is that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, for instance, put $1 billion into an infrastructure fund. The Resilient Recovery Task Force, which I was very grateful to be a part of last spring, that was one of the things that we talked about, and I was constantly hammering the table. And as Teara and Troy would know, and any Indigenous leader, quite often we're the only Indigenous people on the table, but we hold a lot of weight, and people are listening. We're starting to see more people on governance. And I was appointed to the Suncor board, Sean Willey appointed to the TELUS board, Sherry Brandt appointed to the TD board, dear Roberta Jameson appointed to the RBC board. So our executive minds are being placed at the highest levels of corporations to help direct their strategies and those relationships with Indigenous people. And then finally, we've got some incredible leaders like Jeffrey Sear at Raven Capital as an example, the capital pools that are starting to form to support our equitable participation in projects. Nothing about us without us, and that includes equity. And there's some strong projects. I mean, TMX is a project there. We've got Indigenous communities determining how they want to participate, whether that's in revenue or equity or royalties. And our communities are coming all around. We're generating and amassing great wealth, and the tables have shifted. We've got a lot more economic might. And I think Troy, you were talking about with Sophie, she was once the youngest person in the room. Now you were once the youngest person in the room. I was once the youngest person in the room. And now we're looking behind us and we see this tidal wave of these Indigenous youth, the 30 pluses, that are going to continue to transform this country with their education, with their connection to our community, our culture, the importance of keeping that in the front. So I'm excited. I don't know if you could tell.
So awesome, and that excitement is contagious. Seanna, just going on the equity piece, I've been awestruck as I've had not quite a front row seat, but I remember sharing tables with Chief Dennis, yourself at the beginning when we were just talking about possibilities, and now you guys have grown TFL 44 into an equity position for Huu-ay-aht that has more to do with infrastructure and other pieces that are vital to your business operations. What's Western's experience been like in that transition that JP was talking about?
Yeah, I think, I had the fortune of being in some of the early meetings where we were first having the conversations with Huu-ay-aht around their interest in purchasing a tenure. And at the time, it seemed kind of baffling to even think of, do we want to sell it? What goes with it? And how do you make those decisions? But I think, and I think Troy in his opening remarks talked about, what's important and deciding together as partners what's important, finding that place to align on your interests. And they don't always have to align, but I think what we need to do is achieve that place where there's some respect for objectives that each party has. And I think with Huu-ay-aht, what we've been able to do is start from smaller interests. They initially came in 2019 with a 7% equity share. That moved up this year to 35%. And there's an objective by 2023 for them to be the controlling shareholder at 51% in that LP. And I think for Western, what we've learned along the way is that this is a great model. It's really a way to show how we can work collaboratively together with the nations in the areas where we are, hoping to have a longer term vision around what our TFLs and the connection to the manufacturing side of our company, and being able to, have that kind of made in BC, made on the island, and locally grown initiatives. Along with that, though, comes the work that we've started with Huu-ay-aht, and which we're going to be starting with your nations, Dallas, around planning. And really, there's growing a business together, but also deciding how that business is going to operate on the land base, and that's a really important element, I think, of where we're moving. And certainly, it's a growing and changing every day kind of aspect, but it is something that I think we really see the marriage of how we operate on the land base, and then the great economic reconciliation and the opportunities and revenues that can be derived from that, but in a way that is that everyone can get behind. And that really starts with that alignment around interests, and really picking the right partners.
Yeah, tremendous to watch that and to just be part of the potential of growing something like that with the communities that I work for. It's nice to see that we've gotten beyond some of those things like you all have alluded to. I can remember the start of my career where we couldn't even talk to each other without having a lawyer in the room or a facilitator or something like that, to the point where we text each other once a week about how's this going, we talk about our kids, and there's actual real relationships that's there beyond the business opportunities that we're there to discuss. And I think that's something that gets overlooked so much by these big corporations when it comes to building these partnerships, because they don't have that on the ground community sense anymore. So Troy, I'm just trying to weave in some of this into the questions that I'm starting to see pop up. You and I talk a lot about training. There's an importance for making work, but there's more importance in the approach of training for careers and infrastructure. What's some of your thoughts? I know you have a lot of equipment. If your equipment's not working, it's not paying for itself or creating the revenue for some of the communities that are needed. So just what's some of your thoughts around training and making sure that you have that labor pool and work pool to help, implement the projects that you're developing and building?
Yeah, training, it's always an awkward one because it's expensive to do. You don't know if it's going to work because the person you bring onto your work site may or may not work out. You can spend 2 years training a person, and 3 days after they become successfully qualified operator, they take a job somewhere else and you're right back where you started. But it's not a bad thing to have happen. Like creating capacity within your community, whether they stay working for you or not, it's great if they stay working for you, but if they don't, it still betters the community because you've still got someone who's gainfully employed, he's looking after his or her family. Like there's no downside to it other than the time and commitment you made towards training the person. You have to start that process over. We have spent a lot of time, and we're not a school when we do training. We look at the circumstances of the job we're doing, and we train accordingly. So, for example, right now we're out on Coastal GasLink working with Whitset, and with Kaya Resources, we had these initial meetings with the community members and kind of talked about what the process was going to be for you to go from someone who's never been in a regular construction site up to the point of where you're, a supervisor, and have that discussion. And it's funny because I point out, well, you're going to start out as a laborer, and everybody's like, well, I don't want to be a laborer. And it's like, you know what? I started out as a laborer. Like my dad used to always tell me, if you can't work a broom, I'm not giving you a piece of equipment. They're big, they're expensive, they've got to be looked after. So until you can show that you can look after small things, we're not going to give you big things. So we go through this process and, start as labor. So on this current situation, we've gone from having, say, 20, 25 people start as laborers. I think we've got at least 16 of them that are running equipment now. Got 2 that have moved into kind of the charge hand supervisory roles. And it'll continue to do that. The longer period of a project, and this is one of the things we're always pushing for, is a bigger, longer project, because it gives you the time to actually go through all those steps. And we look at LTN, where Glenn Bjorklund is our current general manager of the company, and he started with the company in 1999 when we first started. He was one of the first employees to sign on. Worked his way through the system. He drove truck. He ended up running equipment. He charge hand. He supervised. He was an assistant manager. When Clay Clicktonay bought the shares out in the company, he was promoted general manager, and they continued to be one of Canfor's best operating contractors. So we don't have here's the way to do the training system, but we've figured out how to make it work in all the different circumstances. And that's kind of key. It's not we can't use a cookie cutter to train people. We need to recognize that they're all going to have, different community needs, different wants, desires, and we've got to make it fit accordingly. In the end, if we can, train 24 people on a big project, that's awesome. If we could train more, that'd be better. But the opportunity has to be there for us to have that longevity of work to fulfill our training and, help things out that way. Thanks.
Thanks, Troy. I mean, I think as we go through not only this panel, but the other panels, each of these messages are clearly in the 94 calls to action from the TRC. Mm-hmm. And that's something that the general protesters and the people against sustainable resource development don't quite understand, is how impactful, meaningful, gainful employment is on communities. And the fact that contractors such as some of yourselves are understanding that I need to train people, I hope I keep them, but if that trained person moves on, that's still sort of a win. Obviously it hurts the company and things like that. And that brings me on to you, Teara. I mean, I can't believe I'm going to say this. I have the luxury of the reserve system to help build some of the contracting opportunities that we're working on for our communities. But you've gone into the general mainstream, the public workforce, and you've built a business opportunity kind of from the ground up, literally up because you're flying. That's as up as you get. What are some of the infrastructure challenges that you face? I mean, obviously, capital is always the hardest thing to get, but what have you had to do to just stick through it and make it work? Obviously, COVID's a pain in the ass, and it's hard to plan around that. But just share some insights on what brought you from, okay, I have this one business, to I think I can do this, and I think it's going to be able to give more benefit to not only myself but the communities we'll serve.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for all of that. How this all got started is, I've been a pilot for a long time, and this is my second air operation. I mentioned I had an aerial survey company before, but you think about how are the skills that I've developed and the knowledge that I've gathered. How do I bring that and into service of Indigenous peoples and communities? And so Iskwew Air, the original idea was, how can I use air transportation to help to connect remote Indigenous communities, and how can I use what I've learned in order to serve? And so, yes, I've started up Iskwew Air, and you talk about capital is hugely challenging, especially when you have a capital intense business. If you look at women, only looking from a gender lens, women access less than 3% of capital and make 80% of purchasing decisions. And so, there's such enormous barriers that exist there already. And when you're trying to do something like start an airline, there's all sorts of sexist and racist thoughts about whether that can even be possible, and why would we want to put our support behind something that we think is less likely to succeed as a result of in large part the biases that exist. And so how have I persevered through community, how community works together, how we support ourselves. I'm part of something called the Lift Circle of Indigenous women entrepreneurs, and who love, our literal mandate is to love and lift one another, to support each other's businesses, to buy from each other. And part of the CEO community, again, which is trying to do things differently. The magical opportunity that we have in this moment is when everything is shaken or broken, then we get to decide how we put it back together. And the systems that exist in the colonial and dominant worldview existence that we all find ourselves in is not always built for humans, and certainly not for equity. And so how do we constantly be working towards systems that better serve everyone? And I'm excited about seeing in my sector, we're bringing together Indigenous knowledges with modern technologies. That includes RPAS, or drones, and big drones, and then also advanced air mobility, which is zero emission aircraft, air taxis. But I'm interested in how do we bring Indigenous knowledges together with these emerging technologies to uplift Indigenous land story, sovereignty, and stewardship. And I want to see Indigenous peoples leading in this space. Although it's important, jobs are critically important, but sometimes we're overlooking the other opportunities that exist. And I want to see Indigenous peoples not just getting a job at the end of projects, but being an integral part of all of it. And I said earlier that co-creating the conditions for Indigenous businesses to thrive is the single most natural, swift, and effective pathway to economic reconciliation in our country. So let's just do that.
Oh, tremendous. You can see I'm wearing my orange shirt, Every Child Matters, because a powerful woman brought that child into the world. And the more that we can do to support our Indigenous women in being entrepreneurs, to dream big, because it's just so important for our communities to know that there's other opportunities and challenges out there. So really take my hat off to you for the work that you've done and your perseverance, and look forward to talking to you again after, and maybe bringing my daughter to come see your operation so she can start dreaming big at that young age, and we can do what we can as a community. I see one of the other questions, the financial structures like community trusts built into the company's partnerships that are being created to ensure that wealth is generated are directly reinvested into communities and territories to further opportunities. I know from my personal experience, most of the dollars that we make from our resource development opportunities get recirculated back into our guardian programs, into our monitoring programs, to make sure that they aren't unsustainable at the end of the day. Maybe JP, as we get into some of the closing comments, you can just talk about what you've seen in your vast array of professional life on just what do you see those revenues being used for now that we're trying to get off the Indian Act and get off the teat, so to say, as we develop own source revenue? Where do you see it going in the projects that you're involved in?
Well, I see we're running down on the clock here. I'll be very quick. The most important thing is that we're generating our own source revenue, and that revenue actually gets used for community, cultural centers, whatever the community decides is where the money needs to go, because we're so relegated from government funding in those 4 or 5 funding pots. The one thing that I would say, that as we begin to amass more wealth through land claims, etc., I would like to see our communities actually using that to support Indigenous businesses and Indigenous entrepreneurs and Indigenous projects, rather than putting into these big funds that go to off-reserve projects that don't necessarily we're rich on paper that way, but are we necessarily generating the assets and structures to be rich in our own community? So some things to think about as we move forward. The last couple things I would say, and it was just going into the conversation, Dallas, Canadians need to know, and even our own communities need to know, that 65% of us support resource development, strongly or support resource development. 23% are opposed. That's some of the work that we've been doing through the Indigenous Resource Network. I would say just please follow us, because there's so much great stuff that we're doing. We want to hear from the Indigenous resource people to be in there. And also just a shout out to my friends at the First Nation Major Project Coalition. I'm an advisor there, and look at that organization. Chief Shar is the chair. Neil is doing great work. So they, to your question, Dallas, they help the communities with the economic modeling, as well as you talked about the Guardians program and the monitoring. They also have an environmental piece to help communities and organizations that come into that structure to look at how to piece together projects in a respectful way.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Normally I'd give everybody else 1 more minute, but I've done a horrible job at moderating the time on this panel. And normally I would just say, get over it. I have the mic in my hand and deal with it. But the next speaker I actually work for. So I'm going to cut this one off. I want to thank you all for being part of this panel. Tremendous opportunity. Please talk to the people on the panel, reach out, and just keep these discussions going. That's what's really going to make the changes, if we keep talking about success as opposed to talking about potential. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for being part of this discussion. Please make your way again to the agenda tab to select the next session of Fireside Chat with Chief Chris Roberts from the Weewacum Nation, who does sign my paycheck. So Gaelic Asla to everybody, thank you so much for being part of this, and we'll see you all soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.